Several years ago, when I was a teenager of, say, 15 or 16 years of age, there was a couple of men, prominent men from our community, that came by to see my parents. Now, being a nosy little teenager, I positioned myself in a place where I could hear what was going on. And what happened was these men were building a country club in our community. And they were coming and offering a membership to my parents. And they began to tell all of the advantages. There would be private parties, there would be a swimming pool, a golf club. They went through all of the things, the benefits of being a member of this country club. And when they finished, my daddy very politely but very sternly said, "No, we are not interested." Well, they tried again 2 or 3 more times. Each time his answer was the same. Well, when they left, I walked into him because I was gravely disappointed. After all, they did have a swimming pool. And I asked him, "Why didn't you do that?" And without missing a blink or any lecture or anything, he turned to me, put his arm around me, around my shoulders, and he said, "That is not something that would allow my life to give God glory." Now, at the time, I wanted a swimming pool. I didn't quite understand what he was saying. But in years to come, I began to realize that there were things that he did not want to participate, that took place at some of these private parties, because he wanted more to have his life to be lived in the glory of God. Well, when we come to Isaiah, we can even get more of a meaning of what that means to live our life in the glory of God. After all, that is what this life is all about. When we look at the first 39 chapters of Isaiah, we see God's judgments, and it seems harsh. It seems like that so it's hard for us to our human character to understand why these harsh judgments. Well, the one that we're getting to today in Isaiah 34 is going to give us even more details than we have had in the past. And it's going to give us details not just about individuals, but about nations. He says, first of all, he calls to all the nations, come. And what he says is, be healed. Now, what are they going to be healed from? They're going to be healed from the immorality, the injustice, the wickedness that has permeated. We know this because Jeremiah tells us that the heart is wicked. Noah, Genesis 6, it says that the heart of man is evil continually. So we know that there are wickedness in all of us. And that wickedness, when it is transferred to one with power and with authority over a nation, is even greater, because a nation will follow the morality of its leader. So when we see him calling the nations, he's calling those who are in the leadership over the people, because the people follow. We also know that in Titus and Timothy, it tells us that leadership will be judged on a higher scale, because they have the truth that they are supposed to be proclaiming to the people. And in Jeremiah, we see that the judgment against the political leaders and the church leaders was much more severe than it was on the others. But let's look at Deuteronomy 32 and find out a little bit about these nations. Why was he calling them to be healed? And we're going to see some interesting verses here. It says, when the Most High gave the nations their inheritance. The nations, here we are. When he separated the sons of man, he set the boundaries of the peoples according to the number of, this says, the sons of Israel. But Israel was not established at that time. So according to the sons of God is the original. Now, in the sons of God, we learned in Genesis, the sons of God refers to the watchers, which the book of Enoch tells us about, that were the fallen angels. So when he says, according to the number of the sons of God, but then in verse 9, he says, for the Lord's portion is his people. Jacob, which refers to Israel, is the allotment of his inheritance. Jacob, Israel, is God's inheritance, but all the other nations were the inheritance of the watcher angels. These angels were set up to guide the government control into following God's commandments. But we see that they didn't, that they rebelled. But God has always been over Israel. He is even today. That is his inheritance. So when he comes, he is disciplining his children. There is a difference between discipline and total destruction. In the discipline, he is trying to teach them how to follow the righteousness and the justice of God. But when they continue in their disobedience, then punishment has to come. And this is where we're at in Isaiah. He's given them warning after warning, and he's told them, he sent his prophets. And the prophets, some were killed. We know from Obadiah that there were many of them killed. We know that Jezebel killed many of the prophets. So he sent the prophets to give them his message, to give them a better life. But yet they didn't want that. They wanted to be their own gods. They wanted to be the sons of God. And they wanted to set the rules. And this is where that we see when he says, come and be healed. What are they being healed from? From the deception and from the wickedness of the spiritual realm that has led them astray. For the wicked kings. The northern kingdom had nothing but wicked kings. The southern kingdom had a few good kings. You saw the northern kingdom and how they rebelled. And now you are following the same thing. And as a result, I have to give you a writ of divorcement. In Jeremiah 3:8, let's look at what he says. And I saw for all your adulteries and of faithless Israel, I sent her away and gave her a writ of divorce. Yet her treacherous sister Judah did not fear, but she went and became a harlot also. Now when he says he sent her away, this was the Assyrians. In 722, they came and captured the northern kingdom. They took the 10 tribes. Some of them they took to Assyria, but they completely destroyed the land. They never came back. He is warning them here that you saw what was going on, and yet you still dealt treacherously. Now, when he's calling for them to healing, he's calling them to come back to himself. He tells them again in Jeremiah 3:15, if you will just admit what you've done and repent, then I will send you shepherds after my own heart. He doesn't say he's going to restore the land. He says he's going to send them teachers after their own heart, because it is the teachers that have led them astray. So when we look here in Isaiah 34, he is giving us a very detailed account of what's going to happen in their judgment. And it's not a pretty picture. We want to look at this and discern what some of these metaphors and some of these allegories may be. He says in the first thing, verse 2, he says, his indignation is against all the nations, and his wrath against their armies. Now, when he says he's destroyed them, he's destroyed their armies. They have no defense. He is breaking down all the defense of all the nations. Now, these are the nations that are against Israel. Remember, these are the nations that were given to the sons of God. Israel is the inheritance of God. So he's looking at these nations and saying his wrath is against them. He will destroy their armies. He's given them over to slaughter. He has destroyed them. There is no hope. They are gone. And he says, even so badly that their slain will be thrown out. Their corpses will give off a stench, and the mountains will be drenched with their blood. That's a pretty good description of total annihilation of an army. Now, an army is the defense of any country. So when an army is removed, anyone or anything can just walk in and take over that country. Now, he says, the host of heaven will wear away, and the sky will be rolled up like a scroll, and their host will also wither away. As a leaf withers from the vine, or as one who withers the leaves from a fig tree. When he's saying that the sky will be rolled up like a scroll, It's going to be a day of great darkness. We don't quite understand. This is mentioned again in Revelation. It's going to be when Jesus appears. Now, when Jesus appears, he comes in judgment. He comes on a white horse. When he came the first time, he came as the Savior. But when he comes back his second time, he's coming as a warrior against the iniquity and the trespasses of the earth and of the people left on the earth. So he comes on the horse of war to have war against this evil. But it says the host of heaven will wear away. Now, what is the host of heaven? Well, a host is an army. So we've already seen that the armies of men are going to be destroyed. Now he's saying the host of heaven is going to be destroyed. That host of heaven will wear away. Now, this is things that are powerful. The host of heaven is sometimes considered to be the stars. It is also considered to be the angels. We're not real sure exactly what he's talking about here. There are some interpretations. We can see where the host of heaven is in Revelation 20. Let's go to Revelation 21 through 3. Book of Revelation, chapter 20, verses 1 through 3. Then I saw an angel coming down from heaven, holding the key of the abyss and a great chain in his hand. And he laid hold of the dragon, the serpent of old, who is the devil and Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years. This is the millennium. This is what Isaiah is writing about. And he threw him into the abyss and shut it and sealed it over him, so that he would not deceive the nations any longer, until the 1,000 years were completed. After these things, he must be released for a short time. The 1,000 years, he cannot deceive the nations. Now, back here in Isaiah, we are talking about the nations' healings. So we're not real sure of a real solid timeline, but we know that Isaiah is writing about those times. The reason why is because much of what he's writing at this time has not happened. But he's giving a description, and we're going to look at verse 5 in Isaiah 34, where he says, "My sword is satiated in heaven. Behold, it shall descend for judgment upon Edom." Now he is looking at one particular nation. Now, what does it mean his sword is satiated in heaven and it's going to be full of fat? What does this mean? Well, we've already seen that he's going to destroy all the armies, that he's going to destroy the nations. So what does this mean? It means that God takes his sword, dips it in his righteousness, and then he brings it as the judgment against the earth. And because the earth and the people that dwell upon it are so wicked, his sword is going to be satiated with the blood of those who have rejected his salvation plan. Now let me ask you here, what are we being saved from? We often use this term, are you saved? Our salvation, Jesus is our salvation. He brings his salvation with him. What is it referring to? Are we going to be saved from ourselves? Are we going to be saved from our mistakes? No, we are saved from the wrath of God. Now, we don't understand exactly what that means until we look at Revelation 16. The wrath of God is when those bowls are poured out upon the earth. Now, the thing about the wrath, the judgment has to come to establish the reality of the judgment of God. This is not a fantasy. This is not something that's going to happen in a movie. This is reality. It's going to happen, and every soul will stand before the great white throne judgment. The only ones exempt from it are those who are washed in the blood of Christ and who have been forgiven because they are saved from the wrath of God because of Jesus' sacrifice, because of his perfection. James tells us to consider it joy when you fall into trials, because it brings you to patience and endurance, which brings about perfection. And that perfection is the trust, is the acceptance of Christ as our salvation. He is our salvation. So when Isaiah is writing this, it's before Christ's time. This is 700 BC. Christ is not going to be born for another 700 years. But yet he is giving the prophecies of what's going to happen, not only when Jesus returns the first time, or when Jesus comes the first time, but when he returns the second time. So we're looking even past the birth, the death, and resurrection of Christ. We're looking at his second coming. We're looking at the times of judgment. This is what Isaiah is telling us about. Now, let's look up here when he says, it shall ascend. This is the sword in heaven up on Edom. Now, Edom is the nation that Esau, Jacob's twin brother, settled. And so the Edomites are descendants of Esau. And so when he's bringing this sword against Edom. Now, Edom not only is a nation that has been singled out for a severe judgment. There is no hope. But the reason why is because it represents the world, the paganism, the things that are going on. There is no mitigating circumstances. When one turns away from God to another God, they are a part of Edom. When one turns to Christ and becomes Christ, they are a member of Israel, God's inheritance. Now, do not get me wrong. The Jews and the Israel are God's. They will not be replaced. The church has been grafted into Israel. They are not taking the place. Do not make that mistake. Israel is God's inheritance forever and ever. We have the privilege, by his grace, to be grafted into the root of Israel. Now, to get back to what he is saying, and upon the people, this is Edom that he's talking about, I have devoted to destruction. Now let's go to Revelation 19, verse 17. Then I saw an angel standing in the sun, and he cried with a loud voice, saying to all the birds which fly in mid-heaven, Come, assemble for the great supper of God, so that you may eat the flesh of kings, and the flesh of commanders, and the flesh of mighty men, and the flesh of horses, and of those who sit upon them, and the flesh of all men, both free men and slaves, and small and great. There will be no one above another. But at this time, this is what he's calling we've already seen the armies are destroyed. His sword is coming to destroy wickedness. Now he is calling the birds to clean up, to eat the flesh of those that have come. There will be no respect for the dead. And he says, the sword of the Lord is filled with blood. This is unrighteousness. This is injustice. This is the people that have done wicked things to others. There's only 2 commandments that God gave us. The first one is to love him with all our heart, soul, and mind. The second one is to love each other as we love ourselves. Now, when we do not keep those commandments, there has to be judgment, because God is sovereign. What he says is going to be. So when he says to love each other, that is a commandment, not a suggestion. So when he says they are saturated, it's filled with blood, this is the ones who have treated others wickedly. Now, and they are sated with fat, with the blood of lambs and goats. This is when we come and they would bring a sacrifice. These are found in the first 7 chapters of Leviticus, of the sacrifices that were to be offered. But these sacrifices were a picture of Christ and his sacrifice. He is the once for all sacrifice that we see in Hebrews 9, 10, and 11. But here he is saying that his sword is filled with blood and with the fat of the lambs and bulls. He doesn't want the lambs and bulls, because what does he say next? The Lord has a sacrifice in Bozrah. Now, where's Bozrah? Bozrah is in Edom. It's a town in Edom. So when he says, and there will be a great slaughter in the land of Edom, there will be a sacrifice in Bozrah, and there will be a great slaughter in Edom. Now, this is Edom representing all the nations, or is it talking just about Edom? There are two interpretations there. It could be both. He is going to come to Edom. There's a sacrifice in Bozrah that he is going to take. We're going to look at some of the scriptures. Let's turn to Ezekiel 25, 12 through 14, and see what we learn about Edom. This is the book of Ezekiel, chapter 25, verse 12. Thus says the Lord, because, this is a key word, because he's telling us a reason. Edom has acted against the house of Judah by taking vengeance and has incurred grievous guilt and avenged themselves upon them. Okay, let's look at this, break it down a little bit. He's saying, because Edom acted against whom? The house of Judah. So what we're looking at here when he's calling these nations, these are the nations who have come against Israel. Edom is the one that will be completely annihilated. Edom is the one who is got the vengeance coming against her. All these nations have come against Israel. Let's go to Matthew 25 and look at, I don't know the verse, and let's look at what Jesus has to say. For when the Son of Man comes in his glory, and all the angels with him, and then he will sit on his glorious throne. All the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate them one from another, as the shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. And he will put the sheep on his right hand and the goats on his left. Then the king will say to those on his right, come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. Naked, you clothed me. Sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came. And then the righteous said, Lord, when did we do these things to you? And he says, when you did them to others, you did it to me. When you did it to the least of them. Then he will say to those on his left, depart from me, you cursed ones, into the eternal fire, which has been prepared for the devil and his angels. Now, there's a lot in there that we can look at. When he's talking about this, he's talking to the nations. And when we often hear this passage used as the rapture or as the division, but this is not true. This is the nations that he is dividing. It's not the saved against the unsaved. It's the nations who have come against Israel. Remember, look at this. He said, when the Son of Man comes into his glory, verse 32, all the nations will be gathered before him, and then he will separate them. These nations who did not give honor to Israel, God's inheritance, will be the ones that are on the goat side. They are the one that's going to be cast into, and what did it say? Into the eternal fire, which has been prepared for the devil and his angels. This is hell. This is what he's talking about. Now let's go back over here to Isaiah and look what he says, starting with verse 8. The day of vengeance. The Lord's day of vengeance. It says a year of recompense for the cause of Zion. Okay, there again we have it. It's the ones coming. Zion is another name for Jerusalem. And he says its streams will be turned into pitch, and its loose earth into brimstone, and its land will become burning pitch. It will not be quenched night or day. Its smoke will go up forever. If you continue reading these verses, it sounds to me very much like a description of hell. The hell that he said, the hell that was prepared for the devil and his angels. And he says this will be, and I'm in verse 10, generation to generation. It will be desolate. None will pass through it forever and ever. Once they are condemned to hell, there is no one that's going to come rescue them. We see this in the story of Lazarus and the rich man, where Lazarus is in the bosom of Abraham, and the rich man is in the place of torment. And he asked, please let Lazarus come and just touch my tongue with a drop of water. And he is told he can't do that. There's a great chasm between there, and you can never pass one to the other. Once one is condemned to hell, there is no escape ever. But when you read this description of it, just don't go there. To begin with, find Christ and be wrapped in his forgiveness and in his protection so that you don't ever have to go through these things. He says, the pelican and hedgehog will pass through it, will possess it. The owl, the raven will dwell in it. He will stretch over it with a line of desolation and the plumb line of emptiness. One of these animals he is presenting, these are scavenger animals. These are animals that are going, we know that there's going to be animals in heaven. He tells us the lion will lay down with the lamb. So why would there not be animals in hell? The owl and the raven, the hedgehog. All of these things are going to possess, they're going to be there. They live in desolation. And then he says, it's nobles. Now we're going back to people. It's nobles. There is no one there. There's no one in there. It doesn't matter who you were on earth. You're nobody in hell. There is no hierarchy there. And he says, there is no one who can, when they proclaim king and all of his princes, they're nothing. They're no more than anybody else. Instead, thorns will come out, nettles and thistles. It will be a haunt of jackals and an abode of ostriches. The desert creatures will meet with the wolves. The hairy goat also will cry to its kind. And the night monster will settle there and find herself a resting place. Now, I want to talk about this a little bit because there is some things that we need to look at. And even if it's difficult to understand exactly what Isaiah was looking at, but we interpret prophecy by the time of the prophet and the audience to whom he's speaking. Now, the audience to whom he's speaking is going to understand this in a little bit different way than we do. We get some of it in the King James Version, where instead of the hairy goat, he calls it the Satyr, and instead of the night monster, it's called Lilith. Now, these are common things that we know about today. The Satyr is a half goat, a half man. We saw this character in Mr. Thumas in The Lion, Witch, and Wardrobe by C.S. Lewis. We see him in Pan and many other visual things that are turned into fantasy. But when Jesus was standing in Capernaum, and he was standing and talking to his disciples, and he pointed and he said, upon this rock, I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. What he was saying is, this was an area, he was looking down upon an area where a large cave exists, and the Jordan River flows into that cave and goes down into the earth. And that cave is called the gates of hell, because if anything flows down there, it never comes back. But next to this cave with this water flowing down is an altar to Pan, who is a hairy goat or a satyr. He is half goat, half man. There are niches in the walls where they would have images of him put there. And then they would have an altar there. When they would have their worship of Pan services, which was a pagan thing, it would last for days and weeks, and it would be an immoral sexual orgy, and it would be a drunken orgy. And so when Christ says, upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it, he is talking about paganism. He's not talking about Peter. He's talking about the pagan things of this world. This church, his church, will never disappear. His church is his ordinance that the Holy Spirit gave to tell, to proclaim. That is, those of us who have Christ as our Savior are part of that body. Now, when he is saying the hairy goat, he goes then to the night monster and says that she will find herself a resting place. Now, who is she? Here is a picture of a drawing of Lilith from a popular video game. Now, when you look at this, you look at it as fantasy. But now, look at this picture, and ask yourself, is Lilith reality or fantasy? The last picture that you're looking at, the golden statue, is a statue that is in New York City, and it was raised and commissioned as a honor to Ruth Bader Ginsburg and abortion. Now look what it says. She will find herself a resting place. Again, to me, this is giving us a description of hell. I think at the time that it's talking about the judgment, it could be talking about the land of Israel at that time, because when God's judgment comes, the whole earth is going to be turned over. There has to be judgment. The judgment is to come to rid creation of the wickedness. And so all of this is going, and the first enemy of creation is Satan. The next enemy of creation is man. And this wickedness, this is going to have to be destroyed, and it takes the judgment of God to do that. But look at the next sentence that it says, the tree snake will make its nest and lay eggs there. Now, I can't tell you exactly. The only thing that I can tell you about a tree snake is that is a term that is used for their striking distance. It also refers to venomous snakes. But I also know that the snake is often used to represent Satan and his demons. So when it says the tree snake will make its nest and lay eggs there, so it is spoken of the night monster. Now, there is a lot of fantasy about the night monster, or Lilith. And Lilith comes from the Hebrew interpretation of night monster, which is Layla. And it is interpreted in Greek as Lilith. And this is where the name comes from. The descriptions of her come from a lot of the Jewish Mishnah and Talmud, the stories about her. This is the only place in the scripture that she is mentioned. But the Mishnah is the interpretation that the rabbis have given over the years. And one of the stories, and this is a story, it is not real, is that Lilith was Adam's first wife. Now, that is a ridiculous story. Don't even think about that. But that is what is believed by many pagan and New Age people now. And she is also the goddess of the New Age feminist movement, because she left Adam because she did not want to be submissive to him. Now, this is in the Mishnah and the Talmud. It is the foundation that is used, the goddess that is worshipped by the feminist movement. And so one of the characteristics that was accredited to Lilith were, number one, she was a seducer of men, she was the mother of demons, and she was a killer of babies. So you can see this in this picture: the seducer of men, the killer of babies, the mother of demons. And Paul clarifies this for us very much in 1 Corinthians 10:20, when he says that the idol itself is nothing, but the spirit behind that idol is a demon. And you cannot sit at the table with Christ and demons. So this is a very serious thing that he's saying here. And the people in Isaiah's time would have understood it. They would have seen images. Lilith comes, there are images from the Sumerian times, which would have been 3,000 years before Christ. And they have found archaeological images of this creature. So the people knew this name. They knew it was not a fantasy or something strange to them. So when he's talking to them, he's talking about one of the worst of the pagan gods, the enemies, the demons. And these are the ones who are going to work on destroying God's creation. Satan cannot create. He deceives and he deviates. And one of the thing that God created first was the family, to give protection, to give knowledge of him. And Satan will do all he can to destroy the family. And there is no greater demon used to destroy the family than Lilith and Belial. These two demons are out to destroy the family unit. And you can look at these pictures and see how they are planning or how they are doing it. It's no longer a mystery. We see it every day. Let's move on. She'll hatch and gather them for its protection. The hawks will be there, gathered there, everyone with its kind. And what Isaiah is doing here, this is also a metaphor where he's trying to show the horribleness of this place. There's no way that you want to live among these animals. There's no way you could live among these animals. You would become their prey. It would be a danger every step you took. And so, again, what is he describing? We know it's future, but we look at verse 16 and we get a clue. Seek from the book of the Lord and read. Seek from the book. This book was not written at the time that Isaiah put this down. So when he's saying seek from the book, the Bible speaks of itself. He is telling us where we need to go to find the answers. Go, look here, find the answers, find out what is coming. Why do we want to know what's coming? It's real easy to ignore this, but here's the reason we want to know. It's our hope. Because when this happens, this is justice and righteousness. It is not a time of that, oh, we're being punished. No, it is a time that those of us who are washed with the blood of Christ will be vindicated for the evils that have come across us. If you ever question God is a good God, this shows you above everything else that he is. Because when you hear horrible stories of child abuse, where someone has been beaten, trafficked, or something like that, and the first question is, well, where was God when this was happening? Why wasn't he stopping it? He didn't. He will. He didn't stop it because he gave us free will. But every blow, every pain, he feels. Just as that we feel it. Every pain that we feel, he goes through it with us. And when that day comes, that day of judgment, that victim, that true victim, is going to be vindicated. And there will be justice for the harm that one has done to another. And this is why we must love one another even as we love ourselves. Because that is God's commandment. He wants us to love each other. We are all his children. But when one abuses another, he will protect his own. He will not protect the children of Satan. And those who choose to follow after Satan have no recourse. They have no hope. We see our hope. He says here, not one of these will be missing. Not one of who? The wicked. The ones who come before the great white throne. Everybody will come before the great white throne. God is the supreme court. He is sovereign. He will make, his judgment will be final. And no one will miss it. You can't get around it. None will lack its mate. You can't get away from its mate either. For his mouth has commended, and his spirit has gathered them. This is God. He has spoken. He has cast the lot for them, and his hand has divided it to them by line. Those goats in hell, the sheep in heaven with him, and they shall possess it forever. From generation to generation, they will dwell in it. It will be the end. So I ask you today, spend your life and make your decisions and your choices in such a way that your life will give honor and glory to the Lord. For in that, you will give him all your love, and you will love others no matter what they do, no matter how you're hurt, no matter how you're deceived by someone you trusted. There is a day that all of that will be worked out, and you will be seen as God's child. We are his inheritance. If you do not have a relationship with Christ at this point, I ask you to study the book of John, especially John 3. John 3:16, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. Even though we're looking at the judgment here, God died for everybody. It's your choice to whether you choose to follow him or to follow the evil one. And the evil one is a great liar and deceiver. He says in John 8:44, he says in John 8:44, you are of your father, the devil, and when he speaks a lie, for it is his nature. But then the next verse says, I tell you the truth, and you won't believe me. The truth has been there since the beginning, and he wants us to see it. And this is why he had Isaiah write this. There is a truth, there is a hell, and it is real, and there will be many people assigned to it. Don't be one of them. Thank you for coming and joining us today. I look forward to seeing you all next week. And read chapter 35 before we come back.